वेलकम टू इंजीनियरिंग लीडरशिप पाकिस्तान बाय कराची वाला डेवलपर। ये एक पॉडकास्ट सीरीज़ है जो आई हैव स्टार्टेड रिसेंटली एंड आई विल कंटिन्यू ओवर द नेक्स्ट फ्यू मंथ्स, जहाँ पे आई विल बी स्पीकिंग विद डिफरेंट इंजीनियरिंग लीडर्स इन विद इन पाकिस्तान एंड आउटसाइड ऑफ पाकिस्तान, वर्किंग फॉर डिफरेंट स्टार्टअप्स एंड ट्राइंग टू अंडरस्टैंड कि वो काम किस तरह करते हैं. There are many topics in the engineering leadership space where we are not very sure about when we're trying to implement them in our own companies. How do you do good performance management or performance reviews? How do you implement a good feedback session in your company? How do you do hiring? Like these are very fundamental questions that sometimes we all struggle with. So my objective with this podcast is to talk with our leaders and better understand on how they go around do these things, what kind of teams they manage, teams they lead, and bring us more insights for all of us so that we can make better decisions and learn from them. And without further ado, let's get into this episode and see what we can learn from the startup we're evaluating today. Thank you, Lamak, for joining us in this session today. It's really nice to have you, and I'm excited to learn a little more about Bazaar and how Bazaar does their engineering. I know you've recently joined Bazaar. Can we know a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing over the last few years?
Cool. Thank you, Mashood. Um, Before joining Bazaar, I was at Kareem for somewhere around 9 years, the first few of which were actually at Venture Dive when Kareem was initially outsourcing tech um, through VD. And then um, we were acqui-hired and officially became a part of Kareem. So very early on at Kareem, it was quite a small team, 4 or 5 people. So I was sort of doing everything, looking after the infrastructure, the backend systems, scaling, and uh, different aspects of the product, locations, pricing, payments, and so on. And then as the company evolved and domains grew, I moved into the care domain, which looks after customer service. So every contact that comes in from our captains and customers, and the whole funnel that handles these contacts. So from the front end to the back end to how things were working behind the scenes. And then the last thing I was doing at Kareem was leading a team of data engineers, so helping scale that part of the system and making it self-serve so that at scale we could make data accessible to all the uh, business users at Kareem.
Awesome. That's super exciting. That's a pretty amazing journey you've had so far. So now you're at Bazaar. What are you doing in Bazaar right now? What's your role?
Joined the engineering leadership team at Bazaar. So I'm looking at some of the organizational org design, org processes, how we uh, design our architecture. So there's some technical topics as well, plus some people topics as well. So like how we marry architecture and the people side of things to be able to build a resilient, scalable system, not only from a technical perspective, but from a people perspective as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think one of the hardest, few of the hardest challenges in software engineering are actually around people and not technical, unfortunately. So scaling is hard when it comes to people. Awesome. So I wanted to and get an understanding. Okay, obviously now you're working with Bazaar. What is about their vision and purpose that excites you, that you like to focus on, and that gets you going, basically?
Yep. So the thing about Bazaar is actually there's two aspects to it. One is that we're solving a very, very local problem. We're solving a problem that exists in our community. We're not solving a problem somewhere else in another part of the world. And it's quite a big problem, helping bring tech to how retail and how warehousing and how distribution works in Pakistan. And there's a very, very big market for it. But the other aspect to it is that we're trying to build a technical institution out of Pakistan. There's a lot of brain drain, a lot of people going abroad for better opportunities, for better tech. But we want to build an institution that people can relate to, being local, but also being like um, top of the line and ensuring that we don't lose out to all of these other big companies. But there is a big company in Pakistan that people want to stay at and build their careers at and learn and grow at.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's super important, and I can definitely relate to that as well because after running my own consultancy for 4 years, I opted for certificate just because it was a local problem, and it's a whole different vibe when you are out there talking to people and people use your product and you're getting feedback from it. So this definitely helps you with your motivation and drive to kind of build it better and bigger, basically. That's super awesome. So so that's the company. Let's talk a little bit about the engineering side of things. Are you kind of leading a team, a division? How is that structured? What's can you give us a little bit details about what that division is?
Cool. So I'm part of the engineering leadership team. So there's four of us currently, and then there's an engineering team of 90 odd engineers currently. The organization is very, very lean, so we don't have lots of management layers. The things that managers do, we're trying to solve them through more autonomous ways or pushing decisions down lower and keeping the organization very, very lean. So there's just this small leadership team of which I'm a part of. And we try to design the organization such that we don't need a lot of hierarchy and a lot of managers. We're trying to keep it as flat as possible, even while we scale, so that even down the line, we don't slow down because of all these management layers and feedback having to travel through so many layers, but um, being a really, really lean organization.
Yeah, yeah, I think that completely makes sense, and I think at the root of any successful company is autonomy, right? Having that ability to actually take decisions on the lower level, and that's a very hard problem to solve again, right? Because it requires building the trust. It involves having the right processes in place and the right structure. So a lot of exciting stuff over there. I know you're not directly working on a particular team or product, but just generally when you're deciding about technology and stacks, what is the philosophy that you guys think about when choosing something of a technology platform for yourselves?
Cool. Maybe so something differently that we do here, maybe you've heard of it. It's called the technology radar. ThoughtWorks first came up with it. So what we do is we maintain a map of all the technologies that we currently use, and then add technologies that we see potential in, discuss if they make sense, maybe try them out through an MVP or a POC somewhere in the stack. If it works out, if we think it's good for wider adoption throughout the organization, we move it up our technology radar, which is in the adopted sort of state. And then technologies which are dying out, we move out. But this technology radar applies to the whole organization, and these are decisions that we try to take together. So it's not driven by any particular individual or team or leader, but it's a view that the whole organization has and something that anyone can contribute to.
That's super cool. And what sort of elements would influence something in your technology radar? Let's say we're talking about like a language stack. So what would you be thinking about when you're placing something in the radar?
Yep. It has to solve a specific problem. So there's already technologies and frameworks and tools that we already use. If there is something that comes up which cannot be solved through an existing technology that we use, then we probably consider it. But also there are things that we R&D and try out, even if there isn't a very specific use case for it, because there might be a blind spot that we're not aware of.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And so what derived from this is this growth of full stack developers that has come into the market. And I wanted your
Mhm.
perspective on it as a technology leader. Are you guys encouraging the use of full stack development as part of the engineering teams, or do you guys have more of a split between front end, back end, and DevOps teams right now?
Um, our philosophy is to try and build teams that can deliver or build experiences end to end. Now, that might mean that a team consists of front end, back end developers working together, or that might be one person wearing both hats. It depends. But the objective is that we enable teams to do something end to end, not have to pass through different departments to build something out. So, and then of course it depends on what people themselves want to do, what they want to build their expertise in. But from an organizational or from a process perspective, again, we try to be lean, um, try to minimize handovers so that things can get delivered as quickly as possible. To the extent that we actually do pair program and mob program. In fact, most teams here pair program and mob programming sort of built into our DNA. So while we build an experience, and if there are like front end developers, back end developers, or full stack developers in a team, we try to work together and solve one part of the problem first before moving on to the next. So if we're, for example, building an experience that comprises of both backend and front end, we might work on the front end component together. In the process, also learn, like the backend developers learn how the front end works, and then move on to the backend where everyone then continues to work together. Then to the infrastructure where again everyone would work together.
That makes sense, and I think at its core, I've always thought of this as that the more people you involve, the higher the overhead of communication becomes, and the more discussion needs to happen, right? So if you have a single person doing multiple things, yes, in most cases you would get tied down due to time restriction, but in many of the cases, sometimes it's just best to hand them over everything and let them just execute really fast, and they usually end up doing a better job. So that's definitely positive. Yeah, but I think I love the focus that the focus is more on delivery rather than how the thing is happening, because a lot of the times that becomes irrelevant, right? The focus should be, are we able to ship a really good quality very quickly? And I think that's super awesome. You guys are doing that. I want to transition slightly into something related, and that's career ladders. And so you have all of these different kind of engineering talent. How have you structured your career ladders in the company? And are you guys having separate tracks for managers and ICs right now? How does that work?
We're trying to strike a balance between having a ladder because that's what everyone else does. So we have to map to the rest of the industry so that people coming in know like what their title is and stuff, but we don't rely on it too much. And what we instead try to focus on is having these roles, which is like either you're a coach or what we call an experienced engineer, which you might map to an individual contributor sort of track. And the coach then leads to that leadership sort of role, which in traditional terms we might also call a manager. But a coach is not a manager. We've stripped out all of those performance management or more administrative sort of things out of that role and left that mentorship aspect, that coaching aspect, training aspect to it, and call that person the coach. And the rest of the processes are so lean that we try not to have managers in place to control things.
Yeah, that's very interesting though, but because I've not really heard about a structure that works in that particular way, so this is a little bit new to me as well. Um,
Yeah.
but I think you've got the gist of it. So basically, they're not like properly defined tracks, and they're more like two groups of people, and you have your experienced software engineers and then coaches. But this does lead into a very interesting thing. Then, since you've stripped out all of the managerial and performance stuff from the coach, how does that work then? How does that happen? Who does that?
So the engineering leaders take care of those responsibilities, but we're building processes that are then really, really easy to execute. So at the end of the year, everyone's not feeling tense about what's going to happen, but it's very predictable. Everyone knows what's going to happen, and the engineering leaders actually take care of the execution. So if there's any feedback that needs to be gathered, if whatever decisions need to be made, the engineering leaders at the end of the day are responsible for those. Yeah. The, the other aspect to it is that a lot of the reward systems and incentive systems that um, are adopted widely in a lot of organizations are built out of archaic sort of industries that existed maybe 100 years ago, trying to incentivize people if they do a good job or they put in effort or something like that. Whereas our line of work is much more creative, and those sort of incentives narrow down people's focus and creative thinking, and lead to local optimization as well a lot of times, because people stop thinking about the bigger picture and start targeting getting promoted or getting a higher reward than someone else. And those are a lot of things that we're trying to move away from. I can't say that we have moved away from all of those things, but our philosophy is to try and build a reward system, a growth system that is built for our industry, the type of work that we do, and our times instead of 100 years ago. So, um,
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think I have a relatively similar philosophy on this, and reward is actually something that's I actually call it dangerous, right? Because like you mentioned, because most people want it, but then the reason for wanting it is very sensitive, and if you don't direct the wants the right way, then it can lead to a very skewed results and have a very negative impact on the company actually. I think completely definitely on point, and very interesting space, because I think a lot of other companies are also around the world are kind of restructuring how they think about these things, and how do they kind of create a better environment for engineers and folks like working in the knowledge domain, basically. So that's definitely interesting work happening on your end on that one. Um, awesome. So one other point I just want to touch on this when we talk about performance management. You talked about having an annual system for reviews. Is that so? How do you guys continue that conversation throughout the year? Are you guys having regular one-on-ones, update cycles? Is that structure in place as well?
yep. So, we're trying to be as continuous as possible with the feedback. That's sort of the guiding principles. Now, there's several different cadences to it. One, maybe I'll start with the most continuous of all, which is because we pair program or mock program, we're working together. So we get, if there's something to learn, something to improve, there's a lot of feedback that we get on a continuous basis. If I worked in isolation, then the earliest feedback I would get is when someone reviewed my work. So one, there's that aspect to it. The other is there's a coach around you as well. So in that pair programming session, there is a coach that is coding with you and working with you. So there's a lot of feedback that comes from the coach as well. And then there's um, a other channels of feedback, one-on-ones, for example, that you mentioned, that might be happening on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. And then there's 360 feedback as well, which might have a higher cadence, because there's a lot more effort involved collecting feedback from everyone and processing that into something that's useful. So there's different levels to it, but we try to make it as continuous as possible.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I think this is a very critical part for any good engineering culture, because without feedback, it's very hard to improve yourself and kind of keep that continuous
Absolutely.
incremental improvement going on. So that's amazing to hear. I want to shift gears a little now, and I want to talk a little bit about hiring. And what is the philosophy of hiring in Bazaar specifically for engineering? What do you define as a good engineer, a good candidate for the Bazaar engineering team?
Cool. So there are two aspects to it. One is the cultural aspect, or the mindset that the person comes with, and then there's the technical aspect. The technical aspect is probably similar to a lot of other organizations as well, like doing coding interviews or system design and evaluating how the candidate does on their technical competency. That might also be specific to the role that they're interviewing for example, whether it's a mobile developer or a backend developer or a data engineer and so on. And then the more important aspect to it is um, whether that person is humble and hungry to learn, and if they're adaptable to new ways of working, but not only adapting, but then continuing to improve what we have. If those things match, and then we're pretty happy, and I think we yeah, that's sort of what we look out for: someone with a growth mindset, someone who's very hungry to learn, very humble, uh, plus some technical skills.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think for personally for me, I am always. Um, I think the most important part, even above skills, is usually the communication part, right? If a software engineer is a poor communicator, he can be the best engineer in the team, and he's gonna mess up everything, unfortunately. So stuff like that. But the follow up question is that like communication or hunger or learning is this is very difficult to measure. So what are you guys looking for in a candidate when you're observing these things? Basically, what should they be doing in order to show themselves or in order to be the right people, basically, for a company like Bazaar?
Yeah. So maybe I'll add another aspect to it there, that instead of looking out for something very, very specific, we try to look out for what the candidate is good at. So we're not trying to find deficiencies or what they're not good at, but we're trying to find what they're good at, and then figuring out if that skill or if that uh, soft skill, technical skill, whatever it is that something that would be beneficial for the team? So, for example, if someone is not good at communication, but the rest of the team is great at communication, so that's okay. We can bring in someone because they learn from all of these other people who are great at communication, and those other people will hold their back when that person is struggling to communicate. But that other person that we bring in might be really great at something else that the rest of the team is not. So uh, if there are those trends that come up, if we find something that we haven't seen before, or we're looking for a specific skill in particular, for example, someone that is really good at communicating because that is something that the team would benefit from, uh, then we look out for that specific thing. But otherwise, we don't expect everyone to be the same or to be great at everything, but to be good at a few things. And like we try to make a great team instead of look out for individuals who are perfect in certain things.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because at the end of the day, it's like we said in the start, it's a people's game, right? If people come together, only then will you get anything done. Otherwise, it's not a one person show. That's amazing. Um, Following on from this, I think one of the things that is very very hard, especially in engineering, is ensuring team growth, showing them. We talked about career ladders before, but how do you help your engineering team kind of level themselves up over time that they're spending over there? You've already mentioned coaches as well, which is I think a very nice touch. But just from a structure point of view, how is this set up at Bazaar right now?
Yep. So the philosophy is to learn and grow continuously. It's not something that we want to be doing once a week or once a month. There are activities that happen in that sense as well. A lot of tech talks, a lot of colleague initiatives, a lot of initiatives that are driven by the organization. For example, we have a coaching academy which helps people grow certain skills in certain roles. But what we try to do is in the way that we work on a day-to-day basis, we try to ensure that learning and improvement is built into the process. So there is a continuous feedback loop. There is continuous sharing of skills, of sharing of knowledge, so that we are improving and growing on a continuous basis. And that's where these methods of co-creation, of coding together, of solving problems together, pair programming, mock programming, again, sort of kick in and help build this culture of learning continuously.
Yeah, I think that's a very critical part of any engineering organization. I want to extend that a little bit more, and I want to also talk about specifically skills based. So a lot of the times we see is like front end engineers wanting to learn back end, or back end engineers wanting to explore DevOps, or just get deeper into their current domain that requires specific training courses, whatever. So how have you guys structured that thing within the company?
Absolutely. So one is that the teams that we have are cross-functional. So you get exposure to all of these different areas within a team. But some teams, of course, are more specialized. For example, there is a developer experience team, there is a data team, and those teams are there's a security team as well. That and these teams focus on certain areas of the stack. And so for the most part, you're in a team where you have exposure to all of these different skills, but then we do rotate people as well. And we don't want people to be spending time in one place, so that they develop these other skills as well.
All right, yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So you mentioned something interesting. So you guys have a DX team. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that team does, and how does that impact engineering productivity in general?
Yep, so that team is responsible for making sure that our developers are number one, they're happy. And as you mentioned, that there is a team that is focused on building all of these developer productivity tools, and they don't have to worry about um, customer requirements, or like their primary customer is the engineer. So they're like building the products that will help improve the lives of these software engineers. So it's everything from observability to tools that help improve reliability, to making sure that it's easy to debug problems, to fix issues on production, and like even making sure that issues don't reach production, of course. So there's a lot of parts to it, from infrastructure to observability to logging to monitoring and so on, that the DevX team looks after.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's becoming slowly a critical part of any engineering team nowadays, simply because it's again about focus, right? And you either get to focus on shipping product stuff, or you get to focus on solving your own internal problems. So if you have a team specifically for that, it kind of helps align a lot of the issues within the company for the engineers. That's super awesome.